ULTRAVIEW versus Carter versus Spot Hog. These are the releases I have the most experience with, and I just wanted to put them head to head. So first is the ULTRAVIEW button. One of the most popular releases on the market. A piece of that probably has to do with ULTRAVIEW marketing, but it is a fantastic release nonetheless. It's got a classic thumb button release function. A couple great things that make this release as popular as it is. So one is the string keeper that's actually part of the hook. Now there is thumb button releases in the market and hinge releases that aren't able to sit on a string. So for bow hunters, me included, the string keeper that's actually built into the release is super handy. I mean, that's one of the best things about the button right away. I think every handheld release should have some way to keep the release on the bow. This is the stainless steel version, which means that it's pretty dang heavy. It's probably about 50% heavier than the Carter or the aluminum version of the UV button. Like almost any ULTRAVIEW product, they definitely place an emphasis on ergonomics. So the actual fit and feel that this release has is really nice. And you can see this thing has a ton of use on it. The button itself is extremely adjustable. So you can see that the barrel has actually been swapped out for the Carter. The UV barrel that comes on these releases is sitting on my wife's choice. We'll talk about that later. You can see that the barrel itself doesn't just sit on the lever that activates the release. It has a secondary lever coming off of there. So not only can you adjust the actual barrel itself, but you can adjust this lever independently, whether you want to rotate it or bring it in or out. And something to keep in mind when you're moving that lever in or out is you're changing the amount of leverage that you have on the release activation. So the further out that this lever sits, the less tension and pressure it's going to take to activate the release. The closer, the more tension it's going to need to activate the release. Not only can you adjust the thumb position itself, but as you can see up here on these indicators, you can adjust the travel and the force required to activate the release. So force is self-explanatory, but travel is something that's really fun to play with, because if you want, you can add just a little bit of slop into the release before it goes off. And for some people, myself included, that'll help you build tension into the back of the release before it actually is activated. You can see that I've actually got my button set up with just the tiniest little bit of slop in there. And that just helps me get enough back pressure into it to execute a surprise release. We'll shoot some of these poopy arrows while we're down here, just in case I put one into the wall or something. That completely changes my anchor point. That's wild. Gosh, it feels great though. It really does. I do really love this release. The way that it feels, the way you can adjust it. This release is definitely one of my top picks. Not the release that I've been using for the past year and a half, and I won't be switching back. So next up is my current choice, the Carter Wise choice. My current choice, the Wise choice. Yeah, that makes sense. The Wise choice itself, if you're comparing it on features, this release, it's not quite as finished or full of features as the UV button. So let me show you what I mean. If you look at our barrel adjustment here, you can see we have two holes that you can choose from for barrel position, but you can't oscillate it and move it in and out to the same degree that you can with the button. Now, I got lucky enough that this positioning of the button is perfect for me, but for some people, you might not be able to make this release fit your hand the way that you want to. You might not be able to get that barrel as deep as you want it like you can on the UV button. I'm sure some of you are wondering why I have a UV barrel on the carder. And I know it might even seem kind of blasphemous to brand swap like that, but this Frankenstein is what works out perfectly for me. This knob just has a certain way of really biting into my hand. And I love it. It's very tactile. When I'm at full draw, it's very easy for me to feel when I have proper pressure on the button. Very similar operation to the UV, but instead of being able to cock the release and slip it onto the string, the actual release itself clicks shut just like that. So you can still put it in your string just like that, but let's say this thing was in your pocket or you're just playing with your release as you're hunting and you click it. There's no way to get this release onto the string without first firing it and clicking it onto the string. And I know for some of you whitetail hunters, that might be a problem. Obviously, just don't play with your release and keep it on the bow. But listen to just how loud this release is. If you had to do that just to get your release onto the bow, I actually had a buddy this year who told me they had a deer come in, but then had to click the release onto the bow. And that was enough to lose the opportunity on that deer. So, something you got to be aware of. You can quiet this release down, what I've learned. So check this out. If you don't want it to be so clicky, if you hold the button back here when you click it, listen how much quieter that is. If you got to be stealthy, that's the way to do it. So I've already told you that the ergonomics on this release aren't as good. It's pretty loud, and I don't like the way it clicks onto the string as much as the button. So why am I choosing the carder over the button at this current point? And that all comes down to the release length. What do I even mean by that? If you put these two side by side, what you'll notice is the distance between the finger slots and where the release hooks onto the string is over 1/4 inch longer on the UV button. And that's a serious problem for someone at 28 inch draw length. I used to shoot 28.5, went down to 28. I'm trying to milk every 1/4 inch of draw length that I can get. But while the carder release might not be as feature filled, as ergonomic, I value the fact that this is a reliable release with a really short neck. So I can shoot this release extremely accurately, which end of the day is what matters. But it also lets me anchor in a way that lets me get the most out of the bow setup itself. Look how much just that 1/4 inch changes my anchor. So I'm gonna anchor in the same spot. There's my normal anchor. So you see how tip of the nose on the string, I can see right through the peep to my sight housing. Now the ULTRAVIEW. Close my eyes, anchor in the same spot. Get my nose to the string. Look how much higher that peep sight is. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but I can't. My peep sight is in the way of my sight housing. It completely changes my anchor point, which isn't a problem. Obviously, I can just set the bow up to this release. But the problem comes in the length of the actual neck of the release. So, fantastic release. If you're shooting a little bit longer draw length and you're willing to give up that 1/4 inch, then I wouldn't steer anybody away. But for me, it's the wise choice that works out absolutely perfectly. And I get a little bit of a bonus by having the UV knob on there. This setup is just, it's money. Now for you index release shooters, we got the Spot Hogg Wise Guy. Similar to the Wise Choice, but this is the Wise Guy. I mix them up all the time. A lot of you will probably know this as Cam Hanes release. This one also works extremely simply. It's got the BOA, or at least a BOA option, which means you can crank it down to position instead of having a leather buckle like you see on a lot of index releases. There's pros and cons with both. With the leather buckle, you will have a slightly more accurate way to attach your release. And what I mean by that is based on the tightness of this release, that will change ever so slightly how far this release will get away from my wrist. So being able to set to an exact hole on the release can help you a little bit with consistency, but even that leather stretches a little bit over time. So it's give and take. So you have a super solid construction with great adjustability. You see here, you've got this bracket system to adjust the length of the release. This is about the shortest that you can get it. So you'll notice that this is a totally open hook there at the end, which I'm not gonna knock it for, because unlike a handheld release that I prefer to be able to sit on the bow, this is always attached to your wrist. The good thing about the Wise Guys, with the open hook, it's totally silent, so listen to this. It's not loud at all. And let's say you get into position on your stock or deer comes out of your tree stand, it hooks on without having to click on. One reason that I'm always gonna point people towards the Wise Guy over other index releases is you can get this thing pretty dang heavy. So let's compare it over here to this many-year-old True Ball release, and this thing has an absolute hair trigger. If you know about archery shot execution, you know that you can't put any back pressure on that. This is 100% a puncher release. With a good index release like this, come up to my, once you get drawn back and anchored, when you wrap your finger around, look, I can play with the trigger and get deep in there because it's heavy enough. So on this release, right behind the trigger, you have your set screw where you can adjust the weight of the release. The way that we have this set up, you're able to get back to your anchor, wrap your finger all the way around, and pull through your back to execute a proper release with an index. And there's been some releases that have been coming out that I'm actually really excited about. One of the best, if you guys want to practice your perfect shot execution, one of the coolest ones that I've seen is the Solex Clicker. Now that's a pretty inexpensive release. I think it's right at $100. So compared to some of the $300 releases we're talking about, the Solex Clicker allows you to have 2 stages in your shot process, a lot like a hinge or a button with a clicker. Might have to pick one of those up to play with it. Let me know if that's what you want to see. So this is just a really quick video about my experience with, my main experience with these releases. Obviously I played with a couple other ones, and I'm hoping to try a couple other releases and maybe even switch it up for this hunting season. If you've got recommendations or releases that you love, put them in the comments below. Gosh dang, these cheap arrows, man. I think it's mainly just because they're 6.5 mils, not because they're cheap. I was kind of surprised. It seems like there's a lot of San Lita archery fans, which I'm not one of them, but the arrows could be worse. Ooh. People talk about injuring your shoulders by shooting 80-pound bows, but no one says anything about shooting 6.5 mil arrows. Please let me know on your recommendations for releases or what experiences that you've had in the comments. Leave this video a like, help me boost the YouTube algorithm. And as always, guys, subscribe, and may God bless you all.